Good afternoon and welcome to the Living Well program. You can find us here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. on KATB 89.3 in Anchorage as well as KJLP 88.9 in Palmer. You can also find us online and listen live at katb.org. Please be sure to check out our Facebook page at Living Well Radio, and don't forget to find us on iTunes. You can download the podcast there. Again, this is the Living Well program. My name is Cammie, joined by Betty.
Good afternoon. I almost forgot my part.
Did you? You got to stick with the script. We never
I forgot to turn the page.
Tell us about your number today that I assigned you, Betty. How you feeling about that?
It makes me depressed. You said I'm a -5. I never want to be on that side of the scale. I always want to be in positive numbers.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, myself and our guest, we're all -5s today. And if you want to know what that means, you have to come and be a guest on our show.
Or send us a message on Facebook.
Okay, that too. Anyhow, we are so excited about our show today. We have got Amanda Koch joining us, and she is a military spouse, mom of 2, blogger, business owner, and also, as if she could add more to that plate, she's also a master Pilates trainer, and she's got an amazing testimony that we're just excited to dig into today. I want to welcome you to the studio. Thank you for coming, Amanda.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
What a pleasure it is. I appreciate you taking the risk. You don't really know much about us, but we've got a common friend, and so we're entrusting her and making this matchup, and we're thrilled to have you in the studio.
That's the joy of radio. You know, nobody can see our faces or what we have on or how we look, so we can just come into the studio.
It's so true.
And just start talking.
I giggled when I was in the car because I was sending a note to my husband about something and laughing that I was getting ready to go do this radio show, that I've never done radio before. This is a first for me, and that I totally took a shower and did my hair.
What a waste. No, we will be taking a photo, so it won't all go to waste.
Okay, good. All that.
It'll make you
a lot of commitment to do
I know.
It'll make you feel better to know Cammie and I've never done this before either. You know,
it's our first.
We'll wing it.
First year.
Okay.
And a half.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Anyhow, just to get us started, Amanda, why don't you just kind of give us the breakdown? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What brings you to Alaska? Kind of give us a little bit of history there.
Okay. I was born and raised in Texas. I am a native Houstonian and spent my whole, growing up years there in a Christian home, and went to a Baptist junior high and high school, and then college in Dallas. And then this is so random, I went to Nashville and worked in the music industry as a publicist. And it was the most fun job right out of college. And during that time, I'm an only child too. My mom sent me a note and was like, I really want you to meet my friend's son. I thought, oh my goodness, like what a nightmare. That's like everybody's nightmare, right?
My mom setting me up.
Before the age of social media or anything like that. So anyway, while I'm at my job in Nashville, I get this package from this woman that I don't know, and it is from my mom's friend in Houston. And she has sent me a framed picture of her son in a pilot's uniform, because he's in the Air Force, standing next to a jet, framed for my desk. Hilarious, which first of all, I promptly put it on my desk because how could I not? So funny. And now, 19 years later, here I am in Alaska because of that boy in a flight suit on my desk. So
I have uniform.
Exactly. I have an arranged marriage, as we always like to say. But the beauty of that is that my in-laws and my parents are friends, and they're in Houston, and they're about 2 miles apart, and it makes life really, really pleasant. So I got married, moved to Florida, and then ever since then have lived the Air Force lifestyle for the past almost 17 years.
Wow.
And moved around, and that's what brought us to Alaska. And actually, when I met him, he was actually living here in Alaska. And he ended up, we just laughed because we were like, well, we'll just date, which meant kind of vacationing in different spots. And so when we got married, we laughed and thought, oh my goodness, we haven't even lived in the same state, much less the same tiny apartment. So we'll see how this goes. But he asked me, do you want to get married while I'm still in Alaska? And I said, oh no. Definitely not.
And here you
so
are.
Now here we are. And we love it, and it's great. But he is a wonderful Christian man, and God was definitely playing matchmaker in the best way possible by bringing us together. We are complete opposites and have learned to balance each other out. And so anyway, we got married. We had our first child when we lived, one of the times that we lived in Florida, start to lose track a little bit, and had a healthy son, and moved to Virginia. And during that time is when I always kind of trace it back to my life, just kind of that I knew falling apart and just turning into something that was very unrecognizable to me. That was that realization that I think everybody has at some point in their life, that bad things can happen to you personally, despite the life you lead, despite so many different things. And God uses that in different ways in each person. But for us, it was definitely during those years, those really, really hard years. And really what that traced back to was us trying to have a second child. And we kind of thought we'd gotten off scot-free because we had that first healthy baby. And so everything worked. Why wouldn't it work again? And so we ended up finding out we were pregnant again, and that pregnancy ended in miscarriage. And it was if you're familiar with it, it was a missed miscarriage, which means we went into the doctor not knowing that there was anything wrong, and finding out that the baby did not have a heartbeat. And so shocking, just that shocking news. And when people have those significant moments in life, I feel they almost get stored away in your brain like movies. You can see the moments playing out, and you remember it, and you remember the sensations, you remember what you see, what you hear, what you feel. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. I can go back and remember what the doctor said. I can remember the people's faces. I can remember how I felt, how the reactions were. And I always trace it back to that moment of just being like, that was the moment when life changed. There was life before and there was life after, and life really changed. And like everybody who I think is a Christian that believes, that Jesus is their Savior, that that feeling of just crawling through the trenches and knowing that He has you, but still just understanding suffering. And so that just was a big catalyst. It just snowballed into 7 miscarriages, and a lot of other things that came along with it, with dealing with the emotions, the hormones, and everything that goes with that to come into play, of being anxiety, depression, panic attacks, chronic fear all the time, and pain. I had chronic pain that was just, my body was just a disaster. And so it was just that breaking point for me, and it lasted for several years of just being on my knees a lot and praying a lot and having to trust, and just not knowing what the outcome was going to be, but learning along the way that I couldn't stay in the place that I was in because it just wasn't healthy. Knowing that I could get out of it, knowing that God was going to provide a way to get out of that, but just having to trust. And that's such a battle. And I feel my husband and I always joke with each other that we each have different things that the lessons that God really gives you. And each person's is different just based on how you are. And for me, it's control. It's wanting to, well, this happened, so if I do this and this, I will get a different outcome. And that was my huge lesson through that. I mean, there were a million lessons that I could take away from that, but just that part of letting go and trusting. And everybody gets those lessons in different ways. And that was definitely mine, and lasted for several years.
Yeah. So we were kind of discussing before we started the show today that, we all know that this is a topic that just doesn't get much attention. Even in today's time, there's a little bit more awareness, just getting a little bit of traction now. But did you have somebody that you could talk to through those years?
I did not. And I tend to be a private person. My parents tend to be a little bit more private. And like I said, I'm an only child. And so I always had that little bit of private sense to me. And then as they kept happening, I knew of some people that maybe had had one miscarriage and then had gone on to have a healthy baby. Never to the extent that I did, where it was just one after the other and not all the same. they weren't all the same kinds of miscarriages. And so that was interesting. Like, there just wasn't anybody that could tell me what was wrong, doctor-wise. And so I just felt very alone. There's a sense of shame that goes with it, I think, just because it seems as if your body is broken, and for some reason it seems like it's your fault. Like, surely, I did something to cause this. And there is more than there was back then. The aspect of there being support groups, there being access to other people that have experienced it. Because I think when people experience infertility in any of its forms, there's so many different ways that people can experience that. It feels very lonely. It feels as if you are the only one walking through that darkness. And I know for myself, I had a child already. And so then there was an interesting sense of guilt that came along with that too, because don't you have enough? You already have this healthy child. Why are you asking for more? Why do you feel like, there needs to be more? You should just be grateful for what you have. Just a lot of warring emotions. And I think I look back on it now and wish that I had just had one person that really understood that, because to be able to understand and feel not alone in that situation, I think, is very healing, is very validating, is very freeing to be able to express emotions and thoughts that you're having that you feel guilty about, that you feel are maybe wrong, or you're going to jinx yourself, or you're going to do all these different things, to think, to feel anger and to feel jealousy and envy towards people who seem to not be struggling with that. And so there just seems to be there was a very lack of speaking up about it. And it really wasn't until I did end up having another healthy baby. He will be 5 next month.
Wow.
And when he turned 1, I remember thinking in the months leading up, I'm gonna make it public. I'm gonna tell people, because people didn't know. Not even my parents knew how many miscarriages I had gone through, because I just got to a point where I felt like a broken record, and I didn't want them to be sad. I knew they were heartbroken every time, and I just didn't want them to feel that heaviness. They didn't need to. And so when he turned 1, I really felt called to speak up and say something. And when I did, the response was shocking to me and overwhelming, of people that either spoke, to me specifically. They sent me private messages giving me numbers of miscarriages that they had been through. People that you looked at their lives from the outside and you had no idea. You just thought, oh, they didn't have any issues with that, or they have such a happy life, or whatever it is. It's all that thing where we see what the outside is, and understanding that this is a very common issue, and we don't speak up enough about it. And so because of that, I think because of that huge response is a big part of why I do all the things I do now professionally, because I just feel that people need to know that this is a problem, that that we can do things to live healthier lives, but also just to really represent someone that has gone through it, that has survived it, that has used it for something positive, and to be, hopefully some sign of hope for somebody, even though it's not fun to talk about and it's not an easy topic to,
What
bring
was
to
it
light.
like for you guys being fairly young and newly married during those years? What was that like in your marriage?
They were, I see why people can get torn apart, because for us, and like I said, my husband is definitely the spiritual leader in our family. He is a super outgoing, life of the party, big personality kind of person. And he's like that with his faith too. And I, when we first met, going back to the arranged marriage thing, I remember thinking, this is like, I don't even know if I can handle this. Like, this is so big, like just everything about him is so, oh my goodness, and he, when it comes to his faith, I mean, everybody knows that about him in that way that that you just kind of think, my goodness, like everybody should be that way. And, people, when you say, oh, will you pray for this or whatever? He said, he's like, sure, we're going to do it right now. You know, he just does it. He just jumps all in. And I needed that. You know, what I didn't know that I needed when I was 23 and 24, I needed when I was 30. And so that at the same time is very, very, very challenging on our relationship, just because I know for a lot of people, women especially, that suffer from infertility and miscarriage and stuff like that, you put on such a facade, you try so hard to not seem an emotional disaster, you know, so in public, around people, for whatever reason. You don't want people to know, or people know, and you just kind of want to seem like you've got it together. And that's such a common thing that I think women do. And then when you get home, you just collapse from the exhaustion of this facade you put on. And so your spouse, and, you know, if you have children, whoever's living in your home, they're going to see that. And so that was very hard, because I would fight so hard to seem normal and then come home and have nothing to give to him. And there's also the aspect of what men go through, feeling very, you know, incapable of fixing things, you know. And I know my husband is definitely that very typical personality that comes along with males, where if you tell them something that's wrong, they want to fix it. They can't fix it. And so we struggled to just, I think, be consistent and be normal and be happy, because it was just so tumultuous and trying to help each other, but then just being too exhausted to help each other, and having to kind of like either deal with it on your own, or and he has very close friends that I know were super supportive during that time too. But it is very draining to maintain a sense of normal in the midst of that. And people who try to, you know, have children, and we all heard those stories of, you know, just the monthly of, okay, it's time, like this is the time when we can, you know, try again, and feeling like you're fighting a clock and you're getting older, and this, and just so many different things that are piled on top of you, which is a huge weight when you're dealing with fertility issues.
Were both of you kind of on the same page during that process, as far as we want to keep trying, we want to keep pursuing, you know, to the extent of just really wanting that? Or at any point did he start to be like, you know what, let's just accept where we're at? You know what I'm saying? Was there different?
I think, you know, it's so interesting, because I even question myself sometimes, you know, looking back on it, and I'd be in the moment and say, like I said, that I'm an only child. I didn't feel like a family of 3 wasn't enough, because that was the life that I grew up with, and it always felt just normal to me. You know, I didn't have siblings, but I had close friends who were only children, and so it wasn't that. And people ask all the time, why'd you keep trying? I mean, 7 miscarriages in a row is brutal. You know, you kind of get to the point where you just think, I can't do it anymore. And I don't have a good explanation, except to say I kept feeling like I just knew that God would let me know when it was time to stop, or if it was time to explore other avenues of whether that would be adoption, or just, this is it, you know, this is what we need to be. And he always was very supportive of that as well. You know, he was like, we can adopt. He's always been a fan of adoption. And I just always felt like, okay, you know, I just don't think we're there yet. And I think that looking back now and seeing what I do now, and with so much with health and wellness and stuff, you know, I do know some of that is probably coming into play. But I think there was always this part of me too that had this healthy baby. It was my first pregnancy when I had my oldest. And so when a lot of the doctors would say, we're just not really sure, or maybe you're too old, which was not cool, because I wasn't that old at that point. But, you know, just one of those, you know, just these not excuses, but reasons that didn't really seem like reasons. And I just kept thinking to myself, you know, I know my body's capable of doing this. You know, there has to be something bigger at play. And so we would always discuss it, you know, every time it happened, you know, and he was always very much wanting to know, are you sure? Are you sure you really want to keep trying for this? Because he would see what I would go through physically and emotionally each time. But we've always been a team. That's always, you know, there's just not a question of that. And I know that we're very blessed in that way. Not everybody has that.
Yeah.
And he's always got my back, you know, always. And so we just always kind of felt like, okay, we'll know. It will be, you know, it will be time. And I want to point out, you know, I know that's so hard. And having gone through it, I understand it. It's hard for people outside of you that are not dealing with that to really understand that. But that doesn't really matter. Not in an ugly way, but just, you know what I mean? You have to know within your own marriage and within whatever's going on with you that it's okay. And to choose the plan that you feel that you guys can decide on as a team, and with God being an influence on that.
Mm-hmm.
That had to be very difficult for him to watch you go through each miscarriage knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it.
Mm-hmm. You know, he says it has made him, you know, love me more to be able to see that, because he's also seen how far I have come. You know, I was so broken during those years, and he was one of the only people who really saw it, because I just wouldn't let other people see it. And we had a son at home, you know, that was a whole other story, because that's an interesting thing to go through when you have a child and then you can't have another child, or seemingly can't have another child, and then you focus all of your energy on the one child in a completely neurotic way because he's all you got. And so you act kind of crazy and helicopter-y, you know, like you're just, you know. And he's such a well-adjusted child, and I'm so grateful for that. You know, maybe I hit it well enough, but it's an interesting dynamic, I think, that also adds into it as well. But my husband is just, it's made him a better person in a different way than it's made me a better person. You know, like he is very in tune with my fears. I used to feel so guilty, and I don't know if anybody out there will relate to this, but when I would go through these struggles and when I was going through the miscarriages and just so miserable and broken and sad and distraught all the time, that's, you know, so much when fear can take over and where the enemy can really jump in and take advantage of that. And so fear, as a result, has always been a huge battle that there's just, even now, like residual scars from those years that are faded and are so much better, but can still sneak in. Mm-hmm. And who doesn't? I mean, we all have the things that we fear. And I used to feel so guilty that I would be fearful because I would think I'm not trusting God enough. And I would just use it as another way to beat myself up in those moments. And because my husband is very calming to me, you know, he, you know, just the sound of his voice, just for him to say, you're going to be okay, or everything is okay, whatever, you know, something so simple in statements mm-hmm. It talks me off a ledge in seconds. It changes me completely, you know. And I used to feel really guilty of that. And then someone pointed out to me, a Christian counselor, he said, why do you not think that God put him there for that reason? You know, that he can be that calming force for you. And it's not that you're not trusting him. It's just who God has given you
mm-hmm. Wow.
in those moments to feel peace. You know, what is needed, you know, he was very direct and knew how to deal with me also. So he was like, that's silly, Amanda, you know, see it in a different light. And when you see it in that light, mm-hmm. it makes you realize, well, wait a second, that was just part of the plan the whole mm-hmm. time. And so it's not so much about
So God really knew what you needed in this
arranged
marriage.
I know, in that snapshot framed picture mm-hmm. in Nashville, Tennessee.
What a relief, too, to just kind of let go of that, you know, that thought of thinking I need to trust harder, I need to trust more, and then just kind of lean into what God brought to you to provide that.
And I know for myself, and I grew up in a very Christian Baptist environment, just with school and stuff like that. And so I think there is that part of me that can sometimes be if you want to use the word negative, or just something that people that grow up in the church and kind of have that life their whole lives deal with, that part of just
You can always do better.
you can always do better, and you're not doing enough, and maybe you're being too selfish, or you're not being Christian enough, or whatever the phrases you want to use, that just eats at you or comes at you at times when you're more vulnerable. And so since then that's been very freeing to me, like I said, like him pointing out that to me. So now I know, I'm like, well, I need to talk to my husband. I need him to just say, hey, you're okay. And it's amazing to me that, and it's made me communicate that to other people too, that, those can be different people in your lives. It doesn't always have to be your spouse, but God puts those people there for a reason.
That is awesome. I love that. That's one of those little nuggets of truth. You just kind of, I'm going to keep that in my little pocket right there. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I know that many women are going to readily identify with what you've been talking about, because I've heard so many talk about how they feel guilty, the shame, because they could not carry this child. So I know this program will be an inspiration and an encouragement to them.
I hope so. And I did something recently where I was talking about the emotions that come along with multiple miscarriage or infertility or any of that. And I think there needs to be somebody that says or speaks up, or just the message that it's okay to have all the emotions that you're having, because they are very real. And I know for one, when we were going through some of it, my husband and I would we'd have a gazillion tests, or, there's that part of wanting to know if there's something wrong with you, wanting there to be something wrong with you, and not wanting there to be something wrong with you. You're not really sure which one you want, but, and I would just think and tell him out loud, I just want it to be you. I want there to be something wrong with you. I don't want it to be me, because I feel like I'm always the broken one. Even though they couldn't necessarily find something specific wrong with me, I wanted it to be, I just want it to be you. And he was like, I want it to be me too. Like, I want, just to take it off the plate. But all those emotions that I think women feel guilty about thinking or saying, that need to be okay, because those are very realistic and real emotions and normal. Those are the things that you should, that we do feel we're human.
Amanda, what was the time frame for your 7 miscarriages?
So I had like I said, I had my first son when I was 29, and then I had my first miscarriage when I was 31 or 2. They all start to blend together. I kind of started to lose count a little bit, but then it lasted, and then I had my second son at 37. So my kids are 8 years apart, and I get a lot of questions about that. They're 2 boys. They're like, oh, it's just, it also will make you, when you go through fertility stuff, it also makes you really aware of what you say to people in passing. Little things that you may have said before, people say all the time and don't think about, whether it's, when are you going to give that little boy a sibling? And that, things like that just somebody says in a grocery store that you go in the car and lose it, because that's a whole different, set of emotions. But yeah, so I had them spread out. I had 7 over the course of, I guess, about 5 or 6 years. And they were, like I told people, they're all different, because I didn't have the same kind every time, which was another reason I just kind of felt like there's something more here. There's not, I had mist, I had ectopic, I had chemical, I had standard. I had them, I had 3 DNCs. I passed them naturally.
Wow.
I had injections of a cancer drug to try to save my fallopian tube. And so there was another part where I just felt like, I feel like God was just giving me lots of experiences so that I can relate to more people in that way.
But that's a lot of grief and tragedy.
It is.
In a short period of time.
It is. And to try to kind of just pick yourself back up
each time.
Because that's what you're kind of encouraged to do. There's a lot of grief, and there's residual stuff, but it's amazing too, and I tell people, I always like to point out, because people always identify the fact that I had another child and I got my happy ending, if you will. But I always like to point out, when I was in those the first few years were the worst. It was just the part where I was just crawling. I just was so ill, for lack of a better word. And during those times is when I, started ending up on this path of trying to restore my body. Like I knew there were so many things within me that were broken that maybe weren't being identified by doctors, but I knew, I'm like, no healthy body, this doesn't happen to somebody who's healthy. And so going through all these ways to try to be healthier with the food I was eating and, you know, the trying to limit my toxic load and trying to move my body in a healthy way. And so there were steps, and it wasn't quick. I mean, my goodness, it was not an overnight path, but that idea of just wanting to find that joy in life and just lightness and peace, that happened before I had my second son. Like I was able to find joy in my life and have that peace in my life. And then he came along.
Yeah.
He was not.
That's a key part of your story and your testimony.
Right. Like it was this added bonus. And when he came, when he showed up, we were like, well, this is why we didn't stop. You know, like now it all makes sense. But you can find that joy and you can find that healthy spot of restoration, and God can provide that without it necessarily. It wasn't about just having.
Yeah. No, that's an important point to share and a key part of your testimony. So I appreciate you clarifying that. We are out of time.
Because I'm so chatty.
If you can believe it. But listen,
I cannot believe it.
We didn't even get time to kind of dig into the health and wellness part of what you bring to the table and some of the things that you blog about, because Betty left me on a cliffhanger. Like, how do we detox our purse?
So that's right. I do have a blog post.
So we're going
to
to have you back, Amanda, just so we can share some of those things and talk about it.
And I won't be quite so domineering.
That was fantastic. I appreciate your vulnerability and just coming in today and just really opening your heart and sharing about this. I don't doubt one bit that many women can relate and appreciate you sharing.
I hope so.
Yeah,
they will.
So thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks you guys for having me.
And that is another Living Well program. And you can find us here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. on KATB 89.3 in Anchorage, as well as KJLP 88.9 in Palmer. You can also listen live online at katb.org. And we do hope that you'll join us again next Wednesday.